The King of England was, in 1314, so alarmed by a game being played in the streets of London that he issued a royal decree to ban it, on pain of imprisonment. He complained of a great uproar in the city caused by mobs hustling over large balls, from which, he warned, many evils might arise. Over the next few centuries, English kings would try to outlaw this game more than 30 separate times. They failed every single time. That game, that unbannable, riotous street brawl over a ball, would grow into the most popular sport the world has ever known, watched by billions, worth hundreds of billions of dollars, capable of stopping entire nations in their tracks for 90 minutes. A ball you can buy today for a few dollars once terrified kings. That sounds insane, but the fact that monarchs feared it, that it was banned, that it survived every attempt to kill it, and then conquered the planet, tells you something. Football was never just a game. It never was. So, how did a chaotic medieval mob sport, played with an inflated pig's bladder through the streets of English villages, become a global religion followed by half the people alive? How did a game with almost no rules turn into the single most unifying and sometimes most dangerous cultural force on Earth? To understand that, you have to go back much further than those angry kings, thousands of years, to the very human urge to kick something round. People have been kicking balls for as long as we have records. The earliest documented version comes from ancient China, a game called kuju, or kickball, played over 2,000 years ago and mentioned in a Han Dynasty military manual. Players kicked a leather ball stuffed with feathers through a small opening using their feet and never their hands. FIFA itself recognizes kuju as the earliest known ancestor of the game. Now, historians are careful here. There is no direct line from a Chinese court game to a modern stadium. The honest truth is that the urge to kick a ball toward a goal appeared independently all over the world. The Greeks had one game, the Romans another. The Japanese played a graceful version called kamari, and indigenous peoples from Mesoamerica to Australia had their own. Kicking a ball is not an invention. It is almost an instinct, something humans seem to reach for wherever they gather. But the game we actually play today was not born in ancient China. It was born, kicking and screaming, and occasionally deadly, in medieval Britain. Across medieval England, on holidays like Shrove Tuesday, whole villages played a game called mob football. There were no real rules, no limit on players, and often no boundaries beyond the next village over. Hundreds of people would surge through streets and fields, kicking, carrying, and wrestling an inflated animal bladder toward some distant target, sometimes the door of the opposing village's church, miles away. It was violent. People were injured, sometimes killed. Property was destroyed. Shops were smashed. This was the chaos that so enraged King Edward II in 1314. And monarch after monarch tried to stamp it out, often because they wanted young men practicing archery for war instead of breaking their legs over a ball. Over roughly 3.5 centuries, English authorities passed more than 30 laws trying to suppress football. Kings, mayors, and magistrates all took their turn, and it never worked. The game was too joyful, too popular, too deeply rooted in ordinary life to be legislated away. They had a problem, a violent game they could not control. The solution, they thought, was to ban it. They failed for 300 years, generation after generation. Football simply would not die. That stubbornness, that refusal to be killed off, is the truest thing about this sport. For centuries it stayed a wild, local, lawless thing. What finally tamed it was the most unlikely place imaginable, the elite boarding schools of England. In the 1800s, schools like Eton, Rugby, and Harrow all played their own versions of football, but every school had different rules. Some let you carry the ball with your hands, some did not. When boys from these schools went off to university together, they could not play against each other because no one could agree on how. So, in the mid-1800s, students at Cambridge tried to write down a common set of rules. And then, on the 26th of October, 1863, representatives from a group of London clubs met in a pub called the Freemasons' Tavern and formed the Football Association, agreeing on a single set of laws for the game. The most important decision they made was this: you could not carry the ball with your hands. The clubs that insisted on handling and carrying the ball refused to accept it and broke away to play their own game. That game became rugby. The game that banned the hands became association football. Two of the world's great sports were born in the same room, in the same argument, split apart by a single question: can you pick up the ball or not? Everything that followed, the World Cups, the billions of fans, the empires of money, flowed from that one decision in a London pub. And that word, association, is where a global argument was born. University students in England had a slang habit of shortening words and adding an ER sound to the end. Rugby football became rugger, and association football became ASOC, then soccer. That is the secret almost no one knows. Soccer is not an American word. It was invented by the English themselves as posh student slang for their own game. Only later, when other sports called football took over in places like the United States and Australia, did the word soccer get pushed across the Atlantic and start to sound foreign to the British who coined it. The name people argue about was born in an English classroom. Once the rules were written, the game exploded, and it exploded along the veins of the largest empire in history. The first official international match was played in 1872 between Scotland and England. It ended 0-0, a goalless draw, and it began a rivalry that still burns today. But the real engine of football's spread was not diplomacy. It was work. British sailors, railway engineers, factory managers, and merchants fanned out across the entire world in the late 1800s, and everywhere they went, they brought a ball. They played on the docks of Buenos Aires, in the mining towns of Brazil, in the ports of Spain and Italy and Africa, in the schools of the elites and the streets of the poor. Local people watched, joined in, and quickly made it their own, often beating the Englishmen at the game they had brought. This is why so many old clubs across South America and Europe carry English-sounding roots in their names, echoes of the foreigners who first rolled out a ball. But football did not stay a colonial import for long. In country after country, it was seized by ordinary people and rewoven into local identity, until a village in Brazil or a barrio in Argentina could feel that this game had somehow always been theirs. Football rode the rails and the shipping lanes of the British Empire, and it took root faster than almost any idea in human history. Within a generation, it belonged to the world. If you are finding this video interesting, hit subscribe. We dig into the hidden histories behind drinks every week, and you will not want to miss what is coming next. Back in Britain, the game was becoming something new, a mass spectator sport and a working-class obsession. The FA Cup began in 1871. Huge crowds started paying to watch, and here a fault line opened that would define football forever: money. The gentlemen amateurs who ran the game believed players should never be paid. Football, they insisted, was for the love of it. But working-class men in the industrial North could not take a day off from the factory to play for free. So clubs began quietly paying them under the table, especially the skilled Scottish players who came south. The scandal forced the issue, and in 1885, professionalism was legalized, followed by the first professional league in 1888. It was a genuine class war, fought over a ball. The Southern gentlemen who wanted football to stay a gentlemanly amateur pastime, and the northern factory towns who turned it into the pride and livelihood of the working class. The working class won. Football had become a job, a business, and a religion for millions of ordinary people who packed into stadiums every Saturday, organizing their whole week around the match. The people who played it and watched it were no longer aristocrats. They were miners, dockers, and factory hands. The game had found its true congregation. By the early 20th century, the game had outgrown any single country, and it needed a global authority. In 1904, representatives from 7 European nations met in Paris and founded FIFA, the international federation that still governs world football. Tellingly, England, the game's birthplace, did not even bother to join at first, assuming the rest of the world would follow its lead. The world had other ideas. In 1930, FIFA held the first ever World Cup in Uruguay, a small South American nation that had fallen wildly in love with the game. The host nation won, and a global tournament was born, one that would eventually dwarf every other sporting event on Earth. Football was no longer England's game or Europe's game. It was becoming the whole planet's game, and the planet was about to show just how much it cared. And here we reach the darkest chapter, the one most people have never heard. Because for a brief, brilliant moment, the biggest crowds in football were not there to watch men at all. During the First World War, with the men away fighting, women poured into the factories, and they started playing football too. The most famous team, the Dick Kerr Ladies, made up of munitions workers from Preston, became a genuine sensation. They were brilliant. They raised huge sums for wartime charities, and they drew enormous crowds. On Boxing Day in 1920, they played in front of 53,000 spectators at Goodison Park in Liverpool, with thousands more locked outside, unable to get in. 53,000 people for a women's match over a century ago, and that popularity was exactly the problem. It threatened the men's game. So, in December 1921, the Football Association did something shameful. They banned women's football outright, declaring the game quite unsuitable for females, and barred women from every stadium and pitch under the FA's control. That ban was not a brief mistake. It lasted 50 years, not lifted until 1971. An entire game, thriving and beloved, was deliberately strangled and shoved into obscurity for half a century, out of fear and prejudice. The women's football we are only now rediscovering was not new. It was stolen and buried for 2 generations. Football did not just unite people. Sometimes it was used to shut them out. The men's game, meanwhile, kept growing into something almost spiritual, and it revealed both the best and the worst of humanity. There is a story people love to tell about the very first Christmas of that same war, 1914, when British and German soldiers reportedly climbed out of their trenches, met in no man's land, and played football together amid the mud and the dead. The truth is gentler and hazier than the legend. The truce was real. The carols, the handshakes, the exchanged gifts all happened, and soldiers almost certainly did kick a ball around in places. But the famous organized match with a tidy final score is mostly myth, stitched together from rumor over the years. Still, the reason the story survives is telling. Even in the middle of the deadliest war the world had yet seen, football was the thing enemies reached for to remember they were human. That is the strange power of this simple game. After the Second World War, football became the definitive global spectacle, and it produced gods and national heartbreaks. In 1950, Brazil hosted the World Cup and built a colossal new stadium, the Maracanã, certain of victory. In the deciding match, before a crowd of around 200,000, the largest ever to watch a football game, tiny Uruguay stunned them, and an entire nation fell into a grief so deep it is still spoken of as a national trauma, remembered by a single word, the Maracanazo. But Brazil answered by giving the world Pelé, who won his first World Cup as a 17-year-old and turned the game into pure art, the first truly global football superstar. Argentina, meanwhile, gave the world Diego Maradona, who, in a single 1986 World Cup match against England, scored 1 goal by illegally punching the ball in with his hand, cheekily calling it the hand of God, and then, minutes later, scored what many call the greatest goal ever, dribbling past half the England team. Cheat and genius, sinner and saint, in the space of 4 minutes. That was football's power to hold a whole nation's joy and rage at once. And the World Cup grew until it became, by some measures, the most watched event on the entire planet. Its final drawing over 1 billion viewers, more than any other single sporting spectacle. That reach made football irresistible to the powerful, who learned to use it as a mask. When Italy hosted the World Cup in 1934, the fascist dictator Benito Mussolini turned it into a propaganda festival, plastering the country with imagery, reportedly leaning on referees, and parading his team as proof of fascism's glory. Italy won. Amid lasting accusations, the tournament was rigged in their favor. Decades later, in 1978, Argentina's military junta hosted the World Cup, while it was secretly torturing and disappearing thousands of its own citizens, some in a detention center barely a mile from the stadium where the host nation lifted the trophy. Prisoners could reportedly hear the crowd roar. There is even a name for this now: sports washing, the use of a beloved game to launder the reputation of a brutal regime. Football's magic, its power to make an entire nation feel united and proud, is exactly what makes it such a useful tool for those who want to hide something ugly behind it. Sometimes the passion spilled straight into violence. In 1969, El Salvador and Honduras, already boiling over land disputes, migration, and border tension, played a series of bitter World Cup qualifiers. The matches did not cause the war that followed, but they lit the fuse, and within weeks, the two nations were fighting a brief, real war that killed thousands. History remembers it as the Football War. The game did not start the conflict, but it focused it, the way football so often concentrates a whole society's pride, grievance, and identity into a single 90-minute flashpoint. That is the double edge of this sport. The same passion that unites a village can, turned the wrong way, help set nations against each other. But that intensity has a shadow, and football has paid for its passion in blood. The game's tribal loyalties curdled at times into hooliganism and violence, and its overcrowded, poorly managed stadiums became death traps. In 1985, at Heysel Stadium in Brussels, fan violence and a collapsing wall killed 39 people before a European final. In 1989, at Hillsborough in England, 97 Liverpool fans were crushed to death in a catastrophic failure of crowd control, a disaster followed by decades of lies and cover-up before the victims were finally exonerated. Football's greatest strength, the raw devotion of its crowds, was also, at its worst, lethal. Those tragedies forced the modern game to change, tearing out the old terraces, and rebuilding safer, all-seated stadiums, and reshaping football into the slicker, safer spectacle we know now. But the lesson was written in loss. This game was never trivial. People have died for it. And then came the money, on a scale no one could have imagined. In 1992, England's top clubs broke away to form the Premier League and struck television deals worth fortunes that grew, over the decades, into billions. Football and television turned out to be a perfect marriage, and satellite broadcasting beamed the biggest clubs into every corner of the globe. Suddenly, a club in Manchester or Madrid had hundreds of millions of fans in Asia, Africa, and the Americas who would never set foot in its stadium. The best players became global celebrities earning astronomical wages, their faces selling shirts and sponsorships from Lagos to Jakarta, and the transfer fees paid to move a single player between clubs climbed past $100 million, then $200 million. Entire clubs were bought by billionaires and nation-states, treating football as a trophy, a business, and a tool of soft power, pouring in fortunes to buy glory and polish reputations. And the riches brought corruption to the game's very core. In 2015, FIFA itself was engulfed in a vast bribery scandal that saw officials arrested in dawn raids around the world, exposing decades of graft in the very body meant to protect the sport, with kickbacks tied to the awarding of World Cups themselves. The peasants' street brawl had become one of the most lucrative industries on earth, with all the beauty and all the rot that money brings. Today, football is simply the biggest sport there has ever been. By common estimates, it has more than 3 billion fans, close to half of all humanity, and it is played in virtually every country on the planet, from floodlit stadiums to dirt lots with rolled-up rags for a ball. And that last detail is the whole secret. Football conquered the world because it needs almost nothing. No expensive gear, no special court, no equipment beyond something round to kick. A child in any slum, any village, any refugee camp on earth can play the exact same game as a millionaire in a gleaming stadium. It is the most democratic sport ever devised, which is precisely why it became the people's game on every continent. The World Cup stops the world. Club rivalries carry the weight of history, religion, and politics, and the tactics have evolved from the chaotic charge of mob football into something like living chess, from the Dutch Revolution of total football to the modern game of relentless pressing and data-driven precision. And the women's game, the one that was banned and buried for 50 years, has come roaring back, filling the very stadiums it was once locked out of. Its biggest matches now drawing crowds that finally surpass that Goodison Park record from 1920. The game that kings could not kill, that survived war and disaster and its own greed, belongs more completely to ordinary people than almost anything else humans have made. So, the next time you see a ball roll across a patch of grass or a street or a beach and someone instinctively runs to kick it, remember what that simple motion carries. It carries medieval mobs surging through English streets and kings issuing furious, useless bans. It carries British sailors playing on foreign docks, working men paid under the table to play the game they loved, and 53,000 people roaring for a team of factory women who are about to be silenced for 50 years. It carries a hand of God and a goal of genius, the silence of 200,000 weeping Brazilians, the mud of the trenches, the grief of Hillsborough, and billions of dollars changing hands. The riotous street game that terrified kings, that they tried to ban more than 30 times, is being played somewhere in the world right now, on every continent at this very moment, waiting for someone to kick it. Football was never just a game. It never was, and it never will be, no matter how much money is poured on top of it. If this story surprised you, subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden histories behind drinks. We have got a lot more coming.